Today, we're going to talk about why I believe the Atlanta Hawks should follow the Indiana Pacers blueprint and why I actually believe that the Hawks are not too far off from where the Pacers are at. But before we get started, I want to tell you guys to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share, and to continue to support my channel. I want to give a big shout out to the Indiana Pacers for getting to the NBA Finals. They defeated the New York Knicks in Game 6, 125-108. And again, pretty much look, I expected them to win. And like I said, congrats to the Indiana Pacers. They are going to the NBA Finals. They've had a fantastic season. They've had a fantastic run up into these NBA playoffs. And look, man, I want to start with this when it comes to the Pacers. And look, I'm going to get into the Hawks in a few moments, but I want to give a shout out to the Pacers because I think they've earned this opportunity for them to get to the NBA Finals. Like I said, I think they've had a fantastic season. Anyone that's paid attention to how they've been playing, this pretty much started back in January. You know, like I said, since the month of January, the Pacers finished the regular season. I think they were like 41-16. And over that stretch, they had the fourth best record in the league. And so this run from the Pacers has been going on for the last 6 months. Like, they've been a very good to elite team in this league over that time frame. And so I want to give a shout out to the Pacers. But on the flip side, when it comes to the Pacers, I want to also offer some respect and appreciation for the Pacers in this regard. When you look at the Indiana Pacers historically, I admire the fact that, number one, they've done a great job of building through the middle. You know, the Pacers historically throughout my lifetime, they've been a franchise that's been pretty good to really good, but not great, right? Like, that's just kind of where the Pacers have been. Like, I've known the Pacers through my times when they had Reggie Miller, Mark Jackson, Jalen Rose, Rick Smits, Dale Davis. You know, the Pacers were a really good team, but they were never able to get over the hump and defeat teams like the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls. Or, you know, they had a little bit of a back and forth with the Knicks. You know, they got to the finals one time, but they lost to the Lakers. Like, they were really good, but they were unable to give it a hump. And then Reggie Miller retires, and then they get Danny Granger. And then he was there for a little bit, and he ended up getting injured. And the Pacers were kind of mediocre, right? And so they move on from Danny Granger, and then they get Paul George, right? And they had Paul George and George Hill and Roy Hibbert, David West, that team, you know, those Pacer teams that used to battle those LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Miami Heat. Those Pacer teams were really good, defensive minded, but they were never able to get over the hump. And so they move on from Paul George, and then they trade Paul George for Domantas Sabonis and Victor Oladipo, and then the Pacers again become pretty good. But they weren't good enough, and then they end up moving Sabonis, and Oladipo ends up, you know, having a short career with his injuries with his knees, and then they move Sabonis, and then they get Tyrese Haliburton. And here we are with the Pacers. They're good. They become good and consistent with Tyrese Haliburton, and right on cue, they've been to the Eastern Conference Finals in back-to-back seasons, and now the Pacers are going to the finals. And so the Pacers, and by the way, when you look at these Indiana Pacers, like I said, like, they've done a great job of building through the middle. They've found a way to make shrewd trades, and they're able to kind of trade for their star. Or if they're not trading for their star franchise player, they get that guy in the late lottery when they do have a down year or so. And so I admire the Pacers' commitment towards building through the middle. And they've been successful at it. You know, I admire that from afar, because in this day and age, like people want their teams to tank. They want their teams to be awful. They want their teams to be, unwatchable and win 20 games a year and hope for the number one pick in the draft. But it kind of doesn't always work like that nowadays. Especially with the flattened lottery odds, and the Pacers, they've done a good job of they've laid out the blueprint towards building through the middle. And so I admire the Pacers for that commitment, and I think it's benefited them today. And so I admire the Pacers for that. But I also want to give the Pacers credit in this regard as well. They stuck with their process. They stuck with their plan. And here's what I mean by that. The Indiana Pacers hired Rick Carlisle to be their coach 4 years ago in 2021. 2022 was the first year Rick Carlisle was their head coach. Do you know how many games the Pacers won in Rick Carlisle's first year with the Pacers in 2021, 2022, that season? Do you know how many games the Pacers won? They won 25 games. Yeah. The Indiana Pacers, throughout their first year under Rick Carlisle, went 25-57. Their second year under Rick Carlisle, the Indiana Pacers went 35-47. 2 straight years, granted, improvement, but 2 straight years of being under 500 and missing the playoffs. And so how does that happen? How do the Pacers under the first 2 years under Rick Carlisle go under 500? How do they struggle? Well, you look at the Pacers, the first year under Rick Carlisle, they had Domantas Sabonis, they had Miles Turner, they had Malcolm Brogdon, and they kind of had a ragtag team that eventually Rick Carlisle would come to grips on that they didn't fit. They didn't mesh. They didn't flow together. And so the Pacers, throughout the first year under Rick Carlisle, they decided to make some moves, make some trades. And they realized that, you know what? Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner, good players, good big men, but they just don't fit. So we got to make our roster make sense. And at the time, the Pacers, everyone at the time was assuming that, they're going to trade Miles Turner, because he's a quote unquote worse player than Sabonis. We got to trade Miles Turner. But you know what the Pacers did that year? Instead of moving Miles Turner, they moved Domantas Sabonis. And you know who they traded him to? The Sacramento Kings for Tyrese Haliburton. A move that many people back then thought was a mistake by the Sacramento Kings moving on from Tyrese Haliburton. But the Pacers were able to take advantage of that move. They were able to get Tyrese Haliburton and pair him with Miles Turner. And all of a sudden, that move kind of shaped the Pacers' identity, because now you have a team with Tyrese Haliburton as your franchise point guard and Miles Turner as your big man. It was a roster it was a team that made more sense. And now ultimately, Tyrese Haliburton ended up getting a little injured late in the year, and it was a little bit of a loss year, for the Pacers that year. They ended up winning 25 games. And so what happens the following offseason? The Pacers make another move. They move on from Malcolm Brogdon. They trade him to the Boston Celtics. You know what they get back from the Boston Celtics? Aaron Nesmith, who was a throw-in by the Celtics, because the Celtics were like, we don't have no use for Aaron Nesmith anymore. We got all the wings. We got Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. We don't need Marcus Smart. We don't need a wing. We want to get a score, right? In Malcolm Brogdon. And the Celtics were like, we're gonna move on from Aaron Nesmith. And so in Aaron Nesmith, the Pacers get a perimeter defender, 3-and-D wing that you want next to a Tyrese Haliburton. And so now another shrewd move that the Pacers make. They get Aaron Nesmith. And so you roll into the following season with Aaron Nesmith and Tyrese Haliburton. They also draft Andrew Nembhard. And so and he found him in the second round. And so now all of a sudden with Miles Turner and Haliburton and Neesmith, you got a team that made a little bit more sense. And the second year under Rick Carlisle, team starts off good. They showcase their flashes. Team has a good first couple of months. They had a winning record, and then Tyrese Haliburton gets hurt, and it ends up being a lost season for those Pacers. He gets hurt, and the season that was started with a lot of promise goes down the drain, and the Pacers finish under 500. But you know what happened doing that after that, and why I commend the Pacers for their process is they didn't make any rash decisions. The Pacers, after they won 35 games, despite those injuries, could have easily said, you know what, move on from Rick Carlisle. We want to get a different coach. What we have ain't working. You know, the Pacers could have easily done that. But you know what the Pacers did? They stuck with Rick Carlisle because they knew that Rick Carlisle was a great coach. And they knew that that we had a vision for how we wanted to play and what we wanted to be. And we didn't get good breaks. We didn't have good health. And so the Pacers stuck with Rick Carlisle. While in the process, they make these moves. They get a Obi Toppin. They sign a Bruce Brown. And all of a sudden, the Pacers roster starts making a little more sense because they stuck with their vision. They were being patient. They didn't allow any adverse circumstances derail their season. And then the Pacers, the following season, they get a little healthier. They start winning more games. And then all of a sudden, along the way, they get that Pascal Siakam's available because the Raptors want to move in a different direction. They trade Bruce Brown, a player. They sign a free agency. They move him. They get the pick. They trade some of their picks. They get Pascal Siakam. And all of a sudden, bam, the Pacers are winning games. Their vision is coming to fruition. They make the playoffs. They get to the conference finals. Granted, they had some luck along the way, but guess what? In this day and age in sports, you need a little bit of luck. And so the Pacers get some of that luck. They take advantage. They get to the conference finals. They win 47 games. And they lose to the Celtics in the conference finals. But guess what? The following season, they built on that camaraderie. They didn't make any rash moves. They stuck with their process. And voila. They have a better season. They win 51. They win 50 games, and they go on a deep playoff run, and bam, you're in the finals. And I bring all of that up in comparison to the Hawks. Where are the Hawks? Well, the Hawks finished the season. They won 40 and 42. And why I bring that up is because, as I said earlier to start this show, I think the Hawks and the Pacers are on a similar timeline with where the Pacers were 2 years ago when the Pacers won 35 games. And I want to bring this up when it comes to the Hawks and why I think they're kind of similar to the Pacers and why I want to compare the two situations. The Hawks, when they hired Quinn Snyder, they hired him in mid-season 2022, 2023. But you know what? I'm not going to count that season because usually when you bring in a coach mid-season, the coach doesn't have the opportunity to run his system and to incorporate his vision and all of that. So you really want to wash away the 2022-2023 season, you know, even though that was the year the Hawks made the playoffs and they lost to Boston or whatever. I'm not going to count that season. So really, the first year under Quinn Snyder was 2023, 2024. What happened during that year? The Hawks had a bad year, lost year. And in comparison, like with the Pacers realized that Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis, they weren't a good fit. It wasn't working. What also wasn't working during Quinn Snyder's first year with the Hawks? Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. Became obvious. The two wasn't going to work. The Hawks had to make something shake. They had to move one or the other because that pairing wasn't working. It was kind of holding the team back a little bit. And ultimately, it ended up being a lost year. The Hawks had some injuries. But what happened during the following summer? Just like the Pacers, when they traded Domantas Sabonis, they got Tyrese Haliburton. What did the Hawks do during that summer? They trade DeJounte Murray. What do they get back in return for DeJounte Murray? You guessed it. Dyson Daniels and 2 first-round picks. A move that, in my opinion, in about 2 to 3 years from now, we're going to look back at that trade and we're going to come to grips that Dyson Daniels for DeJounte Murray is going to be one of the best trades of the last half decade. That's how much I feel about Dyson Daniels. And so the Hawks make that move. They get Dyson Daniels to fit around Trey, a la the Pacers getting Tyrese Haliburton and fitting them with Miles Turner, because their team makes sense, right? And so there's that similarity. And then obviously the Hawks drafted Zachary Reggie. You have Jalen Johnson in fold, but they're kind of similar in that the first couple of years or so, your coach, the Quinn Snyder here, just like with Rick Carlisle in Indiana, the first couple of years, teams aren't doing too well because you come to realization that, the team, the roster that you have doesn't make too much sense. The players don't fit, right? And so, the following year happens. You get Dyson Daniels. This past year happens. And guess what happens? This year, kind of like the Pacers year when they won 35 games, the Pacers start off good. You see the flashes of what the team could be if they were healthy. Kind of like this year with the Hawks. The Hawks start off well. They beat these good teams. They beat Boston twice. They beat the Cavs twice. They beat the Lakers. They beat Milwaukee twice, Cleveland twice, Boston twice. The Lakers have all these good wins. Your top 6 in the East, 5th in the East, right? And then it comes crashing down with the injuries. Jalen Johnson tears his labrum. He's out for the year. The team falls apart. Just like the Pacers, the second full year under Rick Carlisle, Tyrese Haliburton injures his hamstring. He's out. He's out for the year. Pacers fall apart. And the Pacers end up missing the playoffs. Just like with the Hawks. We end up missing the playoffs, 40-42. And now you look at where the Hawks are at, doesn't it remind you of where the Pacers were 2 years ago? 2 bad years under, like I said, 2 bad years, bad breaks with injuries. You see what the team could be when they're healthy, but they weren't healthy, and then you end up losing. And this is where I am. This is where it is with the Hawks this season, with this offseason. The Pacers, that following season, they make some free agent moves. They get some veterans to make their team better, a la Bruce Brown and Obi Toppin. The Hawks are entering a grace period this offseason. And my advice to the Hawks is kind of like with the Pacers. Don't rush it. Don't make any quick decisions. Don't fire. And look, I'm not saying they're going to fire Quinn Snyder or anything because I don't think they should. But my point is the Pacers did a good job of sticking with their process. They didn't make the home run swing until the home run swing was available for them to make, and they didn't give up a lot to get the home run swing that they ended up making, which was Pascal Siakam, right? And so my advice to the Hawks is be patient. Be a little patient. You have something good happening. You have a nice little young core with Trae Young and Dyson Daniels and Zachary Reggie, who you drafted, and Jalen Johnson, who before he got injured, he was showing, all-star ability and potential. You got Onyeka Okongwu. Like, you have some nice things happening, right? And like I said, the Hawks have a good thing going. And so if you're Atlanta, instead of going for the big home run swing immediately, make moves to add to your bench. You know, don't be in the swing of giving up a gazillion picks and making a home run swing immediately. Be a little patient. You trust and see if Jalen Johnson can make a step, and Dyson Daniels could he make a step and and become maybe a borderline all-star. You got Zachary Reese, who's the number 1 pick in the draft, who I thought had a very good rookie year. Let's see what he can do next year. And you have Trae Young, and you have Onyeka Okongwu. You have a nice young core that can really do some things. And you look at the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference is flawed. Like I said, Jason Tatum is out with a torn Achilles. Boston's not going to be the same. Milwaukee, who knows what's going to happen with them? Will they keep Giannis or will they move Giannis? If they move Giannis, they're going to be worse. And if they keep Giannis, they don't have much around them. And so you got all of that. And you look at the Eastern Conference, it's right there for the taking for these Hawks. And when you look at the Pacers, like I said, I admire Indiana's, patience. I admire their vision because they didn't rush into any big move until it was time. Even the Pascal Siakam trade that they ended up doing, they didn't wait. They didn't rush into that move during the summer. They were patient. They wanted to see, okay, how good is Haliburton? How good is this mix of guys, right? How good is Aaron Nesmith, Nembhard? How good can this core group be? And then as the season went on, the Pacers kind of realized, you know what? As good as we are, we need a little more. And then that's when the Pascal Siakam trade was available for them. And by the way, they didn't really give up all that much to get Pascal Siakam. They end up getting, they gave up Bruce Brown, who they got in free agency. And they gave up 3 first-round picks. Two of those 3 first-round picks they gave up were picks in a weak draft, and they were heavily protected first-round picks. And so they gave up 2 of those picks, and they gave up a future first-round pick, and they ended up getting Pascal Siakam. And that ended up being the difference in them getting to the next level because they were patient. They didn't rush into any moves. They wanted to evaluate their team and see where their team was at. And then as soon as they came to the conclusion that what they had, that we needed a little more, then they pounced and made their move, and they were patient again, and they here we are. They're in the NBA Finals. And so for the Hawks, I actually look at the Hawks, and I think the Hawks, talent-wise, I think they're actually a little bit ahead of where the Pacers were 2 years ago, because I look at a Dyson Daniels, a Jalen Johnson, a Zachary Reese. I will argue that those 3 are kind of more talented than Aaron Nesmith or a Benedict Mathurin, or Andrew Nembhard, pre-Siakam. And so I actually think the Hawks are ahead just from a talent perspective compared to where the Pacers were 2 years ago, before the Pacers made their Siakam move. And look, man, like I said, it worked out for the Pacers. And I think the Hawks are in a great spot, man, compared to where the Pacers are. The Hawks, like the Pacers, they're patient. They were patient. They didn't fire their coach. They didn't rush into any panic trade. They struck when the time was right. And I look at the Hawks, and they have a lot of things going for them. And I also want to make this point. Trae Young, Tyrese Haliburton. Because those two are always compared to each other. At least it's been lately. Who would you rather have? Trae Young or Tyrese Haliburton, or Trae Young or Jalen Brunson? Like, it's kind of been a little bit of a debate as far as like who's the best point guard in the Eastern Conference. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of been a debate. But I want to say this. If Tyrese Haliburton can lead the Indiana Pacers to the NBA Finals, why can't Trae Young do the same thing? Why? I think Trae Young is actually more talented than Tyrese Haliburton. Now, look, I think there are things that Tyrese does that's ahead of Trae, whereas I also think there are things that Trae Young does that's better than Tyrese Haliburton. Like, I look at Tyrese Haliburton. I think Tyrese Haliburton he's a better decision maker. Like, he's better at taking care of the ball. Like, that's something that you can't take away from Tyrese. Like, he's better at taking care of the ball. Whereas I think Trae is more aggressive. Like, I think Trae is a more aggressive scorer. They're both good passers, even though I might argue Trae might be a little more talented as a passer, but they're both good passers. And whereas with Trae, like, Trae's is a better scorer. Like, he's more aggressive. Now, the efficiency, could come and go a little bit. Like, Tyrese might be more efficient, but that can go both ways. Like, Tyrese could be more efficient as a guy that takes, the right shots. He doesn't take a lot of bad shots. But I also think that could work against Tyrese at times, like we saw in Game 5 against the Knicks when he scored 8 points and he was 2 for 7 shooting, because Tyrese has the tendency to be a little passive. Whereas with Trae, like, Trae could be look, there's not gonna be many times we see Trae take 7 shots in a game. I'll tell you that. Like, if he has 8 points, he'll be 3 for 18, as opposed to 3 for 8 shooting. And so you can argue that Trae has the edge in aggressiveness, but at the end of the day, both of these players are uber talented. They're both talented in their own way. They're both very good playmakers. They both make their teams better, their players around him better. They both are an elevator of good offense. When Trae and Tyrese Haliburton are on your team, you're gonna generate a good shot for your team. Guys are gonna be open because of the attention that both draw as that threat to score and pass. You know what I'm saying? And so as a result of that, the impact is similar. And here's the thing with Tyrese Haliburton. And this is where I want to give the Pacers props. They've done after they traded for Tyrese Haliburton, the Pacers have done a really good job of building the right team around him. They just have. Like I said, Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith. They kept Miles Turner, who's a versatile floor spacing big. They traded for Pascal Siakam, who's awesome. Benefit Mathurin is useful. TJ McConnell is a veteran point guard who's good. Thomas Bryant as a backup center. Obi Toppin. Like, the Pacers have done a really good job of building together the right depth around Tyrese Haliburton, while also surrounding him with enough shooting and defense and size to complement Tyrese Haliburton. You look at the Hawks with Trae Young. Now, look, I think the Hawks are younger. They're not as veteran savvy as the Pacers are right now. But you look at the Hawks, it's kind of similar. Like, around Trae Young, who's out, he's small. But Dyson Daniels is 6'7", are one most improved player, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. You got him, and I think he has more offensive upside to be even more than that, considering the fact that he averaged 14 a game on 49% shooting. And so you have that. You drafted Zachary Richey, number 1 overall, who had a very good rookie year. He averaged 12 points a game. Over the last 3 months of the season, he's averaged 14 a game on 50% shooting and 40% from 3. You got Jalen Johnson, who had he not gotten injured, I believe the Atlanta Hawks would have won around 46 to 47 games, and they would have been a top 5 to 6 seed in the Eastern Conference. I believe that if Jalen Johnson didn't get hurt. And so, and you have Onyeka Okongwu, who kind of like with Miles Turner a little bit, starting to stretch the field, stretch the court, shooting more threes, being more versatile. And so you have something there. You know, you got a nice little mix around Trey. You know, and so, and now look, time will tell as to whether or not the Hawks might need to make another big move. But if I'm the Hawks, I think you want to give this young core a chance, you know, to see what they can do next year. And look, if it becomes apparent that the Hawks might need to make another move for that score, that number 2 option, I think they can make it eventually. And look, I'm not going to speculate on who could be available, you know, this summer or next season. But I think the Hawks are in a position where, like, if they need a little more help, kind of like with the Pacers, when they needed a little more help when they traded for Siakam, like, the Hawks have that ability to make that type of move if they need to. And so, you know, big picture, man, you know, when I look at Trae Young and Tyrese Haliburton together, you know, as when we're comparing the two, like, if Tyrese Haliburton can lead the Pacers to the NBA Finals with what he has with the right team, why can't Trae Young lead the Hawks to an NBA Finals appearance if the Hawks can put together a good enough roster that complements Trae's skill set? And quite honestly, I think the Hawks are on the verge of doing that. I think they're on the right track. And when you look at the Eastern Conference, like I mentioned, the Boston Celtics, they're not going to have Jason Tatum, which means they're not going to be as good next season. The Milwaukee Bucks, the Giannis Antetokounmpo, you know, uncertainty. Like, I think the Bucks are on a downward spiral. You know, should I be afraid of the New York Knicks? Should I be afraid of the Knicks? Like, I love Jalen Brunson, but I think the Knicks, I think they've peaked. I think this is as good as they're going to be moving forward. You know, are they going to, or what's going to happen with Tom Thibodeau? Every Knicks fan I see on social media, they hate Tibbs. They hate Tom. They want Tom Thibodeau to be fired. You know, and so I think this is something to wonder. Like, after the Knicks kind of gone as far as they could go, are they going to be as good as they were next year? I'm not so sure. You know, and there's teams like Orlando who I think should get better. You know, Detroit should get better. But you know what? I think the Atlanta Hawks are right there for the taking in this Eastern Conference. I think they're right there. I think they're like a couple of moves away, real moves away. Front court, so just getting some front court depth and just maybe another ball handler. And, like, look, man, if Jalen or Dyson and Reese shave one or two of these dudes, you know, make a real jump in their development, and why can't they? Like, Dyson Daniels is 22 years old. Jalen Johnson just turned 23. Zachary Reese just turned 20. Onyeka Okongwu was 24. Trae Young is 26. Like, Trae Young is 26. He's going to be 27. He's still young, entering his prime. Like, why not the Hawks? Why not these Atlanta Hawks? If Tyrese Haliburton can get the Indiana Pacers to an NBA championship, why can't Trae Young? If the Hawks put together, you know, make a couple of more upgrades and this young team keeps growing, why not? Why not the Hawks? I think it's possible. I really do. And so, you know, look, man, overall, you know, I want to send my congratulations to the Indiana Pacers for getting to the NBA Finals. I commend them for their commitment towards building through the middle and benefiting from that. I commend the Pacers for their commitment to never, tanking and never just purposely being bad. And I commend the Pacers for sticking with their process, for not firing Rick Carlisle when they had a couple of down years. I commend them for sticking with Rick Carlisle, and for Rick Carlisle for validating as to why he's one of the elite coaches in the NBA, and he's one of the best coaches ever in the NBA, in NBA history. And so I commend the Pacers for that process. And as an Atlanta Hawk fan, I think the Atlanta Hawks need to follow the Indiana Pacers blueprint, because quite frankly, they're not that far off.